You know, back in March of 2020, the entire world of education got thrown headfirst into this massive, completely unplanned experiment. It was a real sink or swim moment for everyone. And now, thanks to some incredible research from Dr. John Dodamo, we're going to find out what we actually learned about technology in our schools. So let's dive right in. We all went through it, right? That sudden jump to Zoom classes, scrambling for online assignments. It seriously felt like we crammed a decade of tech adoption into a few weeks. But that brings up a really important question. Did forcing everyone online actually fix the long-standing issues with technology in our schools? Well, as we're about to see, the answer is a lot more complicated than you might think. To really get what happened, we've got to rewind the clock a bit, back to the before times. Before 2020, the tech situation in schools was, well, it was really divided. It was basically a tale of two completely different philosophies, often happening right across the hall from each other in the same school. So on one side, you had the tech embracers. These were the teachers who were all in, who saw technology as this amazing tool for building really dynamic student-led classrooms. And then on the other side, you had the tech resistors. And look, they often preferred more traditional teaching methods and were pretty skeptical about all these newfangled tools. And this wasn't some tiny gap. Research before the pandemic showed that a huge number of teachers just weren't really using classroom tech at all. Now, you might think the biggest problem was just a lack of computers, or maybe not enough training, what researchers call first-order barriers. But it turns out the real roadblocks were often these second-order barriers. Think of them as invisible walls. We're talking about a teacher's personal beliefs, their attitude about whether tech is even worth the hassle, and maybe most importantly, their own confidence in using it. And then, bam, everything changed. In March of 2020, all those invisible walls, all those personal preferences, they suddenly became totally irrelevant. The world shut down, and every single teacher, whether they were an embracer or a resistor, was thrown into the exact same massive, mandatory tech experiment. And the scale of this was just, it's hard to even comprehend. By April of 2020, 1.6 billion students around the globe were out of their physical schools. Education didn't just stop, of course. It was just forced online, in what was a truly unique event in the entire modern history of learning. And let's be clear, this wasn't some thoughtfully planned, elegant online learning system. Nope. This was what experts call emergency remote teaching, or ERT. Basically, a crisis response. And it immediately threw a giant spotlight on that deep divide that had been simmering for years. Suddenly, every teacher had to be a tech user, whether they felt ready or not. So after all that chaos, after teachers were pushed to learn all these new platforms and tools under incredible pressure, we get to the real heart of the research. Now that we're mostly back to in-person learning, did any of it actually stick? So to figure that out, researchers looked at something called continuance intention. I know, it's a bit of a formal-sounding term, but it boils down to a really simple idea. Will a teacher choose to keep using the technology they were forced to learn during the pandemic? This one concept is the key to understanding the real long-term impact of that whole global experiment. And when the researchers crunched all the numbers, a really clear picture started to form. And the things that predicted whether the technology would stick, they weren't what you might guess. It really all came down to two critical and very human ingredients: a teacher's confidence and their attitude. To really wrap our heads around this, we have to get that using tech well isn't just about knowing which buttons to click. This is the TPACK framework, and it shows that the real magic happens right in the middle. It's where your knowledge of the technology, your knowledge of pedagogy, or how to teach, and your knowledge of the content, your subject, all overlap. Basically, it's about knowing how to use the right tool to teach your specific subject in the most effective way. So, the first huge finding is all about confidence. A teacher's belief in their own ability to use technology effectively, what researchers call self-efficacy, was a massive predictor of what they do later. To put it simply, if a teacher believed they could do it, they were way, way more likely to keep doing it. And the second finding was every bit as important. See, it wasn't enough to just feel confident. Teachers also had to believe that the technology was genuinely useful, that it was actually valuable. Their attitude, whether they saw a tool as just another annoying thing to do or as something that actually helped their students learn, that was absolutely crucial. And wow, the data here just makes this so incredibly clear. This table says it all. The statistical analysis showed that teacher attitudes and tech confidence were very high predictors for sticking with the new tools. But now, look at what wasn't a factor: teacher age, Years of experience? That whole myth about digital natives versus older teachers who can't handle tech, yeah, this data completely debunks it. It's not about how old you are, it's about your mindset. All right, so what do we do with all of this? How can schools and districts take these lessons and actually build a future where technology is used effectively, not because they have to, but because they want to?
Well, the research points to a really clear path forward. First, any training needs to be about building confidence, not just teaching skills. It's about creating safe spaces where teachers can experiment, maybe even fail a little, and then succeed. Second, it has to be about the why, not just the how. You have to show teachers the real value for their students to get them on board. And finally, schools need to build a truly supportive culture, moving away from top-down orders and towards real, collaborative peer support.
So, at the end of the day, we're left with this one big thought. The pandemic proved, without a doubt, that you can force technology into every single classroom. But it also taught us a crucial lesson. Force doesn't create lasting, meaningful change. So the real challenge, the one we're facing right now, is figuring out how to make that technology not just present, but to make it truly welcome.